as rising seniors. I assume everyone in the group is a rising senior or otherwise a really hard charging junior, but that we are in full on application mode. So this program, when Susan suggested putting it together, the Jumpstarting Your College Applications, I think is a really nice thing for students to just start to, if you have not already set up some of your applications and been working on your essays over the summer, to get dip a toe in and realize that it's not as daunting as sometimes it might seem. So I'm going to jump in, and one in the beginning, it's not letting me. Oh, there we go. As we look at sort of talking about your college application, I feel as though I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't do a little bit of preliminary work about talking about making sure you have a balanced school list. So when I work with a student, typically we will have roughly 8, 10, sometimes 12 schools that a student is going to apply to. So as you are in the process of starting your applications, many students come to me and they say, I just need a little help with essays. And I completely can help with that, right? I love that part of the process. But what I often find is that they haven't done a really good job about balancing out their school list. So I like to be able to just kind of drop these categories. We're not going to spend a lot of time on this slide, but really encourage you as you work to put your final list together of schools, regardless of what your academic profile is, that you really look to all of these categories, particularly these three, the highly selective, selective, and less selective, and round out your list. So I like to tell students that there are academic scholars, Rhodes Scholars, Fortune 500 CEOs, very successful people in the world that have gone to all of these schools. It is very much not where you go, it is what you do with the opportunity. Every year I have people come to me after the fact, and someone I have not worked with, their child has applied to far too many of what I would say are schools in this most selective category at the bottom that are accepting 25% or less of their students, and inevitably they were denied everywhere. So it is incredibly competitive. As you're building your list and talking about your applications with your family, I think it's incredibly important for you to make sure that you are balancing the list. And usually what I say to students is a third in each category, a third reach schools, which are going to be these most selective or highly selective schools, a third target schools, and a third likely schools. I often encourage students to put one rolling admit school on their list, and that way, we'll talk in a few minutes if you're not familiar with the terminology, but a rolling admission school is a school where if you apply today, usually within about a week, you will have received an offer or at least a response from them. So it is the rolling admit school that allows you to say, yay, I'm actually going to college somewhere, and you're not going to be so stressed about the concept of waiting until, April of your senior year to find out where you're going. So I say that, and know that in this most selective category, I know that gets a lot of the press and focus. Northwestern, Duke, Chicago, Stanford, Vanderbilt, WashU, those kinds of schools that we often, when we talk about those schools, call them lottery schools. And I'll talk in a few minutes and show you a slide example as to why. So again, just kind of doing a little as you're building those likely target reach categories, making sure again that it is a good mix of academic, financial, and social fit for you. Sometimes students get very focused on where their friends are going to college, and they don't always do a good job of understanding what schools are going to be a better fit for them, which schools are strongest for their major, what type of learning style works best for them, proximity to home, that type of thing. So I do think that in terms of the balanced list and identifying, always make sure you're identifying the academic fit, financial fit, and social fit. There is an item on the school's website, you can Google it, that's called the net price calculator. So if you are considering applying to some of these very costly schools, make sure that you understand what your net price is going to be. And I tell students the essays are a lot of work. We're going to talk in a few minutes about essays. So make sure that if you're adding those schools to your list, that it's a school that is actually within your budget, because Student loan debt right now is at about $1.3 trillion, with trillion with a T. So we definitely want to be cognizant of when you're applying to school, what your budget is, and making sure that you can, afford where you're going to be ultimately attending. I don't know why it keeps getting a little pushback sometimes. All right, this is one of the highly selective slides. So one of the things that as you're building your list, I think it's important to understand is what is a school's institutional mission? So I call this the Notre Dame funnel of fun, but really just to help students understand Notre Dame is a very popular school, particularly out of this, District 86 market where we are. Understanding that the applications, so Notre Dame's example, 21,000 applicants. The 2/3 of those students are academically qualified, meaning they could step foot on campus and be very successful. Most have near perfect grades, near perfect test scores, but understanding from Notre Dame's perspective, they can only accept 4,000 students. So I'd like to tell students, it doesn't mean that you necessarily did anything wrong. You could have done everything right, but they just physically don't have enough spots on campus. So again, kind of going back to and I'll come back to this theme a lot, but just making sure as you're applying, develop your applications, writing your essays, that the list is balanced. But one of the things that I think is important as we're writing essays to understand, particularly for some of the why this school essays, is what is the school's institutional mission? So a school like Notre Dame, they are going to give 4,000 application offers of acceptance, but they are only going to enroll about 2,200 students. So the colleges have something called yield. So they understand historically what their yield has been. So for every 1,000 offers they put out, what is going to come back to them in terms of the number of students that accept? And we'll talk a little bit more about how you can, help your cause in that case. But in Notre Dame's case, understanding their institutional initiatives, if you look to the right and you look at, of these 2,000 spots, they are giving, 8% to athletic recruits, which is one of their big goals as a D1 school. 20%, over 20% to legacy applicants. They're one of the few universities that really is still focused on legacy. And then the top is the socioeconomic and first generations, low socioeconomic and first generation. So these are typically families that are making $65,000 a year or less. So Notre Dame has a big mission to assist those first gen and Pell Grant families. So they are going to be then between those three categories. You can see it's about 46%. So almost half of the spots are going to fulfill their institutional missions. And then ultimately on the left, understanding that only 15% of those are going to be from the Midwest, because they're also going to be very focused on geographic diversity as they balance out their class. So again, the theme of balance and understanding that even if you have a perfect application and you have done everything right, and I'm going to help you today try and get through what is going to be the strongest application and how to do that, I think it's really important for you just to understand that these schools that are accepting 25% or less of their students are essentially lottery schools. All right, so let's talk about the applications itself. And let's start with what you're going to be evaluated on. I'm going to drop down the first categories. Just so we're going to actually look at the Common App today. I'm going to go through some specific categories, but just understanding holistically as a university evaluates your application, your grades and rigor. And as rising seniors, the things that you can do at this point in time are somewhat limited in terms of the grades and the rigor of your curriculum, right? It's somewhat fixed. Understanding that from an application standpoint, the universities are looking at your grades and they are converting your GPA typically to a 4.0 scale. So depending on what high school you go to, it might be a bit of an adjustment. They're trying to standardize across the world, everyone on a 4.0 scale, and they're going to be looking at core classes. So they will be calculating a weighted and an unweighted GPA on your core classes. So sometimes students will come in and, be including a lot of what I would consider the electives that maybe were not quite as rigorous, and they're inflating sort of what they anticipate their GPA to be when look at how competitive they're going to be. So understand the grades and rigor is always number one. The other thing that you can do, I know some schools started this week and it rolls out over the next few weeks. The other thing that you can do in terms of grades and rigor is make sure you are taking a very rigorous senior year schedule. As you'll see in a few minutes, your senior year courses are listed on the application. And if you are somebody that's saying, you know what, I've been really stressed, COVID's been really difficult, a freshman through junior year, I've really worked hard, I'm going to dial back a little bit senior year. I have students every year tell me that, and I'm going to not take this class, or I'm going to do the honors versus the AP. You need to do what works best for you, but I will tell you that that is the only thing in terms of the grades and rigor that's in your control at this point. So I encourage you to challenge yourself, take the most rigorous senior year schedule that you can manage. The colleges are watching. If you are applying, and we'll talk about some of the ways you apply, if you are applying in an early fashion, the universities may be requesting your first semester grades. And so the first semester grades are going to be sent to them sometime in January, mid to late January. So when I say increase the rigor in your senior year classes, only to the extent that you feel you can be successful with that rigor, because I do think that sometimes students want to impress the colleges. They go full boat on all AP classes senior year, and it's a big jump up for them. And all of a sudden, when the colleges are in the evaluation process and request those mid-year grades, things don't look so good. So please be cognizant that they are going to request mid-year grades, and your counselor will be sending those, and you want to make sure they're as strong as possible. Colleges often like to say that it is never just one thing, right? They are very holistic in their approach and how they evaluate. The only time in my 8 years I've been doing this that I've ever seen it be one thing is when students in the initial round, you apply, you may be accepted, deferred, or denied. Sometimes students will be deferred. And when those mid-year grades come in, I have had students with almost identical profiles be deferred, and one got a C on their mid-year grade report and one did not. And I don't have to tell you who got in and who didn't, right? So it's really incredibly important. I can't stress the senior year grades enough. Senior year slide and all these fun things that are happening senior year, I want you to enjoy those, and senior year is a blast, but know that you don't want to sacrifice the hard work that you've put in the first 3 years of high school to lose it that way. Standardized test scores. So again, there are not a lot of things that you can do at this point. There still are a couple of tests. So if you are someone that is applying in the early decision round, typically August and September tests for ACT or SAT, the scores will be available in time. Most of the universities are telling students that they are test optional. Probably about 60% to 65% are still saying they're test optional. I think that what you should understand is if you were applying to what I call a high impact major, which is engineering, computer science, business, those universities, even if the university as a whole is test optional, are going to be requiring you to submit test scores. You may be able to apply test optional. They will usually reach out to you to try and find out if you took the test, what the score was, if you did not include it in your application. So I don't want to, I guess, instill any sense of panic, but I would say if you're somebody that is testing, has the ability to take another test and potentially increase your score on it, so it would be higher on a super score basis or even just a standalone basis, I do encourage you to do that. There are some schools that are test blind. The whole University of California system, if they are on your list, is test blind. So that I don't encourage you to build the list around the UC schools as a Midwest student, because they very much cater to their in-state students. But those are the schools where the test score truly doesn't matter. But otherwise, the schools that say it's test optional, they view your application, the grades and rigor as 1, test scores, if they're available, as 2, and then you have your extracurriculars, essays, and some of the other things I'll talk about in a moment as the 3rd leg of this stool. So if you don't have test scores, what they will do is put more weight on those other elements of your application. So if you're somebody that has really shined in all those other areas, and you're not applying into one of the high impact majors that I discussed, then, the testing may be less of a priority for you. Extracurricular activities, we're going to talk, and I'll pull up a sample Common App, and we'll go through kind of what the activity list looks like, and what types of things that you should be incorporating in there. Ultimately, colleges are looking for students that want to come to campus, be engaged, be leaders. We want to pick up as much language as we can that talks about your leadership, your responsibilities, things you've developed, things that you've initiated, self-driven kind of projects, those types of things. Essays, touch on more in detail, but I guess just as a general point here, the colleges, the really, really large colleges, let's say University of Michigan, that gets 80, 90,000 applications. Usually what happens is they're only reading the essays on the students that meet their academic profile. They have sort of a cut score, and then they will read beyond that. That said, you don't know, they're not transparent about what their cut scores always are. So an essay is a really good way, the essays are a really good way to help differentiate. And I'll go into more detail about those in a few minutes. Letters of recommendation, each high school has their own protocol, how they want to handle that, but most students should have made those requests last spring. And those letters of recommendation, typically what I advise my students is to get 2 letters of recommendation from core junior year teachers, and then your high school guidance counselor will also be writing a letter of recommendation, as well as sending a school report. The regional admissions rep for your area, for the university, is usually the first reader on your application. They're responsible for understanding your high school profile and where you fall within your high school profile. So as you are working on building and rounding out your list, you could go to your school's website and look at your high school profile. And in many cases, they will list out the weighted and unweighted GPA and where you fall. So sometimes students haven't had the opportunity, they weren't aware of that. So I encourage you, if you haven't heard of that, to look at it, because I always want students to shoot for the stars and have dream schools. But I think it's really important, if you're shooting for the stars, but you look at your high school profile and realize that you're in the bottom 25%, that you understand that the colleges are going to know your high school profile, and they'll see where you are relative to your peers. So the letters of recommendation, it is incumbent upon you, when you get back to school this fall, to follow up and reach out to the teachers as well as your counselor. Just touch base, maybe give them an updated list or an updated resume if there's some impressive things that you've done over the summer that you'd like to make sure they're aware of. You then are responsible for making sure that these letters of recommendation have been submitted within the timeline. So we'll talk in a few minutes about different deadlines, but November 1st is a common deadline for the early action schools. So if that deadline is November 1st, that means that you should be putting in your letter of recommendation reminders the first week of school. Just touching base. Many times the teachers have not written them over the summer and they're writing them in the fall. So you want to make sure that they understand that you are applying to some early action schools and you need to get your letters out. You obviously want to do it in a polite and respectful way. Thank them again for writing the letter. But it is, if your application is received and it is missing required components, the school will not review your application. So I think that the students sometimes think, oh, it'll get there eventually, and I'm sure it'll be fine. And the reality is, you'll see on the Common App, when the letters of recommendation are loaded, it appears there. It tells who loaded it and which letter of recommendation it is. So when you set up your Common App, and I'll show you in a few minutes, but you will want to make sure that you're paying attention to that so that the letters of recommendation come in and they're on time. Demonstrated interest is something that we're getting a little bit late in the game on, but I do think it's important to touch on. So demonstrated interest helps the universities understand who is really interested in coming to their campus. And the reason that's important to them is the number of offers, like in Notre Dame's example that they put out, if they're going to put out 4,000 offers, if they have students that are similar in academic profile, have incredible resumes, all kinds of great extracurricular involvement, they are going to focus on the students that they think have the highest probability of accepting their offer. So the universities have a software program called Slate that they use, where they will track your interest. And I say to students, view it as, almost think about it as though you have an interest index chip on your head. So anything you can do at this point to build your engagement is valuable. So that is touring in person, virtually, attending a virtual or live information session, reaching out to the regional admissions rep with really thoughtful questions about your major, following them on social media, signing up for their mailing list, spending time on their website. When they send you emails, and I know the colleges have been inundating you with emails over the last, gosh, probably 2 years. Figure out what colleges are important to you and make sure that you are either unsubscribing or blocking the others and reading those emails. The schools that you care about are tracking whether or not you are opening their emails. I tour schools all year round. I just did a huge sweep out east. I was telling Susan, I hit 15 different schools. I would say at least half of those schools make a very big point in their information session to talk about the fact that they want to know that you care, that you are interested in their school. They want to make sure that you are opening and reading their emails. So that is what you can do now. And then also in the fall, the regional admissions reps for many of the universities will come to your high school. I like the fact you're here today in this webinar. It tells me you're kind of engaged in the process. So check with your high school, find out who is coming to campus. It used to be they always came in person, but over the last few years, it's been a mix of in-person and Zoom. So Zoom is typically an evening session where you could listen, your parents could listen in. The ones that are in person are typically during the school day. So those are students only. Juniors and seniors are I have the opportunity to attend those sessions. So go there, be active, be engaged, demonstrate your interest. Interviews will be coming up, and we're not really going to touch on that today, but just know, particularly if you're looking at the more selective schools, that will be part of the process. And you want to make sure that you sit down at the kitchen table or meet with somebody that can help you perfect your elevator pitch. You know, what is your 1-minute version of who you are and what you're interested in doing in college. And then sometimes the interviews are with admissions staff, which those are then evaluative interviews. Other times it might be with the alumni or a student, a senior on campus, and those are often more informational. But in those informational interviews, I have a number of students, older students in college that do those interviews. Those are informational, but the students fill out a rubric about you. So come prepared, be prepared to talk about and highlight what your strengths are. So that is all part of the application process. If an interview is offered, you will find out about it once you have applied. So usually once you apply, they will send out, when you apply to school, almost every university has you create a portal, a separate portal where they will be pushing out notifications to you. And that ultimately is where your acceptance or deferral or denial decision will come out as well. That portal is where they may reach out to you and say, we are allocating 1,000 interview spots over the next 2 months. Know that in some cases, some schools require interviews. In many cases, they don't have enough people to interview. So it's really just the people that are on the ball and get those spots first. So just make sure that you are constantly checking your portal. And I say constantly, like if you do it every other day, that's usually good. That way they're going to reach out if they have missing information, if there are interview spots available, if there are any special events coming up virtually that they would, like you to sit in on. Again, that sort of speaks to that whole demonstrated interest piece as well. And then the last thing, and again, it's a little bit late in the game for this piece of it, but knowing and understanding that when I talked about in the Notre Dame slide, the 2,000 of the 4,000 students that they ultimately accepted, many, as I said, 2/3 of them near perfect grades and near perfect test scores. So using your extracurricular things that you've been involved in to try and differentiate yourself. My joke is often with my students that in high school, students are very much looking to blend in. And I understand that nobody wants to stand out like when they're in, be a target at school. But when it comes to college applications, the exact opposite is important. And that is figuring out how to help your application stand out. So if you are passionate about something, particularly if it's something unique, lean into that with your extracurriculars, building connectivity to that. Again, it's fairly late in the game for you as seniors, but there are Coursera and edX classes out there. You can kind of do and those are free or fairly nominal. There are all kinds of opportunities you can have to build your connectivity to your major. The more competitive the school is, the higher the expectation in terms of the types of things. I have, had students that do everything from starting around profits to developing apps to writing novels. I mean, it kind of runs the gamut. And the goal is that to try and link that to what you're passionate about. So if you have the ability to still accelerate that in some way, the final applications, the regular decision application deadlines are January 1st, typically, sometimes the 5th or 15th. Do what you can to accelerate that standout and build your connectivity to your major. Okay, so these are the different types of how you can apply to school. And I'm going to I mentioned earlier the rolling decision option. So when you go in to actually fill out your application and you are going to load in the schools, I'll show you that actual website in a few minutes, the Common App. You are going to have to check how you are applying. Some universities only offer certain elements of how you can apply. So not everybody offers the rolling decision, but if that's an option, that's the one I mentioned. You apply today, you find out very quickly. It's nice to get one of those in your back pocket sometimes. Typically, the rolling decision schools are going to be the less selective schools, but that does not mean Iowa is a good local example of a rolling decision school. That does not mean that you are not going to have a phenomenal educational experience at a school like Iowa. I have some students sort of turn up their nose when I mentioned some of these rolling admit schools. University of Pittsburgh is another good one. You want to, if you're a high profile student and you are going to be adding one of those rolling decision schools to your list, apply to the Honors College, right? So in a worst case scenario, if none of your other schools, if your list was maybe a tad aggressive and you have you need to fall back on your rolling admission school, you at least have the ability to be part of their Honors College. The other option that's common, I mentioned earlier, is early action. So that is an early deadline, shows elevated interest for a university. Typically, the deadline is November 1st. It does not bind you contractually in any way to the university, but it really often is tied to their merit scholarship deadline. So if you are somebody that is just building your list, it's going to be a little tricky to get everything pulled together for the November 1st deadline. If you're someone that's been sort of pulling your list together over the last year, you've been touring, you've been, kind of evaluating schools, and your schools offer early action, please take advantage of that. It will always show your, as I mentioned earlier, your elevated interest, and it put you in the pool for if the university does offer merit scholarship money, they almost always tie it to that early deadline. Next piece is early decision, and there are 2 rounds of that. So early decision is not offered by all universities. It's probably about a third of schools that offer it. The benefit of early decision is you pick one school, your top choice school, you sign a contract with you, your parents, and your counselor at your high school. If you are accepted, when you apply early decision, you are contractually bound to come or attend. So students say, well, why would I want to do that? Or I'm not sure. I think I have a top choice, but I don't know if I do. The upside of applying early decision is that often at the schools that offer this option, it can double or triple your odds of admission. So a Northwestern, let's say, that has a regular decision admit rate of 6 or 7%. they could be in the 20s if you're applying early decision. It is contractually binding. So if you are going to apply early decision, you need to make sure that that school is within your budget. Some students say, you know what, I know that Northwestern isn't in my budget, so I can't apply early decision or any other early decision school. What I would encourage you to do is, if it's your number one choice and you would like to apply early decision, is that you reach out to the financial aid office at the university. They're the most underutilized resource out there. And you reach out to them and you tell them they are your top choice. You would like to apply early decision. You would like to schedule a meeting so you could understand what your net cost would be. So the net price calculator that I mentioned earlier will give you a really good idea. Those are pretty accurate, but the school will be able to then commit to a number. And then you can decide if that's something your family can afford. Sometimes students will want to see what all their merit scholarship opportunities are going to be, or what the numbers, the values are going to be. So then it's really impossible for you to apply early decision, because you're not going to have all of the early action and regular decision acceptances and merit scholarship opportunities until probably March on the back end. So early decision 2 is so how the timing works out. Early decision 1 deadlines are typically November 1st. You apply to the university binding. When they review your application, they have the ability to accept you, they have the ability to deny you, or they may defer you. And if they defer you, you are a free agent again. So then you're going to be evaluated in the regular decision pool, those people that are applying January 1st, and that obviously gets much more competitive. You have the ability to continue to stay, as that free agent, or there's something called early decision 2 that a much smaller group of schools, I would guesstimate it's around 200 or 300 schools, offer early decision 2. And how the timing works is the early decision 1 deferral or denial, let's say you get, is right around the holidays, so mid-December. The early decision 2 deadlines are typically that first week of January. So sometimes students I work with will have an ED1 and an ED2 strategy, assuming the schools are within their budget. And they then have all of the applications completed, the essay work sort of already framed out, so that they can pull the trigger very quickly if their early decision 1 acceptance does not come through as they hoped. I know I'm talking fast, and please put questions in the chat as well. Susan, we are going to be doing some questions at the end, so Susan will moderate that. There are a couple other concepts out there. So regular decision is the easiest one, January 1st, somewhere January 5th for others. Some of the UC schools are going to be December 1st, or no, December 1st. So I do think that always making sure that you're on their website or using a resource where you can know what the deadlines are. I'll show you a trick in the Common App later about how you can export sort of, if you have your school list loaded, to what those deadlines are and who offers, ED1, ED2, early action, etc. Restricted early action is a concept that the super selectives like the Ivy League, Notre Dame, Georgetown practice this. So if you are interested in those schools and they are your number one choice, what restricted early action means is that you can only apply restricted early action to that university, let's say Georgetown for this example, and you cannot apply early decision to any other school. So you're kind of giving up the opportunity to use that early decision card. What happens is the schools at that elite level actually share information. So if you think somehow you are going to pull a fast one past them and apply restricted early action to all the Ivy League schools, you will immediately be bounced because they share information. So look at your schools. If you have a restricted early action school, make sure that you understand the probability of admission, because if you would have applied potentially early decision somewhere else where you could increase your odds of admission, for restricted early action, there's really no increased multiples for applying that way. Restricted early action schools, let's say Georgetown, are okay with you applying early action to other large public schools. So you could apply, let's say you're going to apply restricted early action to Georgetown, you could still apply early action to University of Michigan, University of Wisconsin, that type of thing. So you're not restricted from other early actions from the big public schools, but you are restricted from applying, it's called REA to any of the other elite schools. All right, so let's move it along. So there is a platform, and I assume that some of you have base information about this just from your school, but it is the Common App. There are about 1,000 schools that use the Common App, and essentially it's a place where there is a base Common App where you're going to be putting in your profile information, your testing, some of your academic information, and then there's going to be a part 2 of the Common App where you're going to load all of your schools, and the schools are going to have their own sets of questions and kind of an additional application. Not all schools are on the Common App. So one of the most common ones I have here on my slide are the UC schools. So the University of California schools have their own application platform. They do not follow, it's completely different than the Common App. So the Common App, I'll talk about what the components are in a few minutes, but if you are applying or saying, oh, I think I'm going to add UCLA to my list as just a willy-nilly, maybe it'd be fun to see if I get in, you're adding about 12 to 15 hours of work to your list by doing that. So I encourage students, if you are considering a school that is not on the Common App, make sure you understand the amount of work involved. Sometimes school will allow you to repurpose, or not they will allow you, you are able to repurpose content from the Common App for that. And we'll talk about that a little bit more in a few minutes. So obviously the Common App streamlines things. You can load up to 20 schools in your Common App. I don't encourage you to apply to that many schools. Like I said earlier, 10 is a good number to target, sometimes 8, sometimes 12. But when you load them in, there is going to be additional work involved in the way of questions and supplemental essays and things. So you do want to make sure that you're focused on, like I mentioned way back in the beginning, that balanced list. There's one essay for the Common App. It's called the personal statement, and I'll talk about that more in a few minutes. So I think that's everything I wanted to say here. All right. So if you, I assume some of you have already set up your Common App account, but if you have not, this is the website, jot it down. So when you actually go in and put in the website, it's going to ask you, you want to click on create an account. And then in most cases, I assume the students that are on this call today are going to check the first year student option. There's also an option for transfer students. So if you are transferring schools, please make sure you click the right box. I encourage you to set it up with a personal email account, not your school email account, because as you will see, the admission offers come in as late as March. There's a lot of activity that happens in April and May, and sometimes if you're waitlisted or something is happening with the school where you're still in communication, those things might happen into the summer after senior year. So you want to make sure you have access to the email account, and often most high schools will shut down your school email account by end of June after senior year. So it's always good to use a personal email and make sure it's one that you check often, right? Because again, they're going to be sending communications to this email account. So I encourage most students have some form of a phone where they can load in, their different email boxes. Just make sure it's flowing into your phone, because I know from the students I work with that many of you are on the move a lot, and your phone is sort of your main tool of communication. But your ability to respond timely, particularly when you get into the deferral and waitlist situations, they might give you 24 or 48 hours to respond. So you want to make sure that you have, always on top of those emails. You want to use your full legal name, obviously, when you're filling it out. Sometimes I've had students in the past struggle, and there's issues with the Common App. And interestingly, one of my partners was having an issue. She had not updated her web browser. So always make sure you have the most updated web browser. Like, if you're using Chrome or whatever you're using, they're not particular which browser you use. But I think the way the software and the Common App is written and the way these schools interface in, It's just at a very high level. So I encourage you to bookmark it on your computer, right? So you're going to be going back to that Common App a lot between now and January 1st, so you can get to it quickly. And they do have an app that you can load as well. I don't like students to fill out the application on their phone because I think it's easy to have your thumbs trip up and miss things. But I do think sometimes if you want to check on something, it is nice to have the app, and it's free. All right. So for those of you that were more on the ball and may have started your Common App account earlier in the summer, I want to make sure you understand that you do need to roll over the Common App to the new application cycle. So the 2022-2023, which is, you're the class of 2023, cycle kicked off August 1st. So that's why I think Susan thought this would be a good time to do this session. But some students may or may not have loaded information in there, but if you roll over the base Common App information, that will all be saved. If you loaded in your schools and filled out some of the school information, your school list will stay, but all of the questions you answered for the school will be wiped out. So hopefully no one did that and that you understood that process. Sometimes I think the schools, I shouldn't say sometimes, every year, they're updating their application. And so the reason it gets wiped out is the application for that university might change. So I kind of listed the things that didn't roll over. Most students are not, the recommendations typically, those invitations have not been submitted in the spring, but if you were someone that is at a school where that is your protocol, know that that does not roll over any of those forms. And then each year you are going to be asked to check a box and review the FERPA waiver. So that's the Family Education Rights and Privacy Act. And that essentially ensures it's you releasing, similar to your medical records, you releasing or giving your high school the approval to release your academic records to these different universities. It also has a component in it where you are confirming that you have not seen or had anything to do with writing your letters of recommendation, and that the universities can rely on those letters of recommendation to be independent verification of what it should be, right? What that person's opinion is of you, the teacher, or sometimes we'll talk in a few minutes about additional recommendation options. So the FERPA waiver, when you set up your Common App, is something that you want to make sure you check. If you forget to check it, the schools, so twofold. One is your high school may not know that you didn't check it and they may still send the information, but the university is then suspect about your letters of recommendation. So you always want to make sure you check that box as one of your first things. All right, so deadlines to consider. So we talked a little bit a few minutes ago about the different ways that you can apply and, rolling versus regular decision, REA, etc. The one thing I want to make sure you understand is when I'm talking about merit scholarship deadlines, some schools are a little sneaky and they do not always tie it to their application deadlines. So it's a way for the university, in my opinion, to find out who's really paying attention. So always when you're applying to the university, find out if they do offer merit scholarship deadline, what is the deadline? If they offer merit scholarships, what is the deadline? And make sure your application is in by that time. So this example of Vanderbilt is a perfect example. There, of schools that do this, where you're not going to be applying early decision. Vanderbilt does have an early decision, which would get your application in time. But if you apply regular decision January 1st, you will have missed the deadline from merit. So be cognizant of that and make sure that you're always on the websites checking. In terms of other deadlines, I tell my students all the time, like map out what your calendar looks like for this fall. So if you have a week till school starts or 3 weeks till school starts, get as much of this done as you can, because senior year is going to be fun, busy, rigorous course curriculum for many people. And it's going to be a challenge to find time in all of your, with all your extracurricular activities as well, to get these applications done. Every single year, let me repeat, every single year, the Common App crashes on October 31st. November 1st is a big early action deadline. I tell students, do not wait until even the week before that week, that last week in October, when I'm working with students and we're in the Common App, it is bogged down. And I know you've all had the experience of being on a website that's not responding. That's what happens. So if you are somebody that's a procrastinator, nip it in the bud right now, get on it, get your applications filled out in there. And if your essays aren't finished quite yet, get your application all filled out, and then you can always paste in your essays before you submit. But just get as much of it done before, well in advance of the deadline. I'll say it that way. And then the Common App, I'll show you, there's a dashboard in the Common App. I'm going to show you how to look at what the application deadlines and requirements are. Okay, what's next? All right, components of the Common App, and I'm going to pull it up in a few minutes, but just in general. So your profile is pretty easy, right? You can do it while you're, chatting with friends or kind of watching a movie, being obviously, conscious of detail, but understanding it's basically name, address, parents, those types of things. The one new change this year for students is the Common App at the request of colleges now differentiates between your gender at birth versus your legal sex. They've added the category of pronouns, and they want to make sure that they understand and are meeting you where where your profile currently is. But they need to understand what your legal sex is for purposes of the application. There's a whole section on family. Usually where a lot of my students get tripped up before meeting is they don't have all their parents' information. So when you're putting in your parents' information, you have the ability, if you want, to include, and usually I encourage at least one parent, you include their phone number, their cell phone number. But then it's going to be, if they did go to college, where did they go to college? What year did they graduate? That type of thing. So that's all pretty detailed. Sometimes, as I mentioned, some schools are evaluating it from a legacy perspective. Other schools really want that information because they want to understand, they're assessing kind of what your family environment was. Is this a family environment where both parents are college educated? Are you a first generation college student? What is your family's profile? Education section, it's going to be your senior year schedule. And again, I'll show you in a few minutes. The biggest thing that I noticed that students miss is there's a section under the education tab called honors. That is something you want to check yes to. And in most cases, I have never had a student that didn't have at least one thing they could talk about. So that would be honor roll, dean's list, national merit commended scholar, semifinalist, finalist, student of the quarter. If you're an academic, if you're an athlete, sometimes those academic, I'm not coming up with the word I want. I think it's, they have a phrase for it, but to honor like athletes that are also outstanding students. Every school's term is a little different, but those types of things can go in there. So a competitive honors section has 5 spots. A competitive student typically is filling up most of those spots in some way, shape, or form. So dig deep, think about your, it's any time during your 4 years that well, at this point, it'll be your 3 years in high school, but sometimes you might receive something in the fall. So just make sure that you're taking advantage of that. And then that you're listing all of your courses out there. As I mentioned, like you want to make sure your senior year courses are out there, and some students don't include everything. There are some schools, Iowa is one of them, and even though they're a rolling admit school, it's literally an algorithm that determines if you get in or not. A human being does not look at your application in that first round, but one of their key tenets that they want is they want you to have all 4 core classes, all 4 years of high school. So that's English, math, history, and science. So if you're a student that decided you were going to skip around a lot and you decided you love business, and so you're skipping some of those core classes, that can actually hurt you in that algorithm for some schools. So make sure if you've taken the classes, you list them. Testing. So when we talk in the Common App is going to have a section where you can put in your test scores. Typically, my recommendation is, if you are not applying to a high impact major that's going to mandate the score, you should apply test optional to a school if your best ACT or SAT is not within the mid 50% or higher. So you can Google, you can look on the school's website. They typically post the profile of their students, get a sense of where you fall. The Common App, how it's structured is, as I mentioned, it has the Common App base, and then it has the school application. When you submit one school, whatever the Common App looks like when you submit that school is what the university will see. So if you are going to apply test optionals to some schools and include your test scores for other schools, you will need to be very, very careful how you do that. On the school's application side, some of them are also asking about testing. So if it's a school where you do not want to include your test scores, you not only need to not include them in the school side of the Common App, but you need to make sure they are pulled off the base Common App as well. So every year, like we go through this a lot. That's often where I see students get tripped up. Sometimes it may hurt them, sometimes it may not, it just depends on the situation. So be careful when you're doing that and understand that you don't submit. It's not as though if you have 10 schools on the Common App, you just release everything at once. You release on a school by school basis, and whatever, when you finish that school specific questions and essays, whatever is on their Common App at that time, your Common App at that time, when you release, is what that school will see. The other tip on testing, and often students miss this a lot. So if you are somebody that is on an accelerated curriculum and you have taken AP classes, AP tests and test scores can be listed in that testing section. The schools are looking for AP tests that you have taken and school tests that you will be taking. So it has you put in, so if you're taking AP classes senior year, you are also going to load those AP tests, and you are going to say that you're taking those tests in May of 2023. You want to include that because, again, you are looking to give maximum impact on your application so that they understand. Often what happens in the real world is you will have decided on your university. May 1st is decision day. So you will have decided by May 1st, the AP exams are usually right after that. Some students, if they know that a university they're going to attend is not going to accept the AP credits, many of the more competitive schools, you have to take the AP curriculum to get in, but they want you to take all 4 years of classes at their university. If they are not going to accept your credits, you may opt to not take the AP test. But at this juncture in September, October of senior year, the plan should be that you are going to take those AP tests in the spring. The other thing that I like to talk about is regarding which test scores you should include. So AP tests are on a scale of 0 to 5. And typically at a large public school like a University of Illinois, if you score a 3 or higher, and for most classes this is true, University of Illinois would give you credit for that. When it comes to applying and including it on your application, typically I tell students that I work with, a 4 or a 5, I would report on the Common App as an AP test score. But if it's a 3, I would not report it. 3 means you kind of just passed. You are going to get credit for it at some schools, but it means that you really did not have you didn't fully master the content. So that is something you can decide for yourself, but just know that, the testing has 2 sections. One is putting in the tests, that you've taken with your scores. And then one is where you're putting in the senior year test you're going to take. So if it's the portion where you're putting in the test with scores, let's say you didn't do well. Let's say you had 8 AP classes and you're going to take 4 of the exams spring of senior year, but the other 4 classes you only scored a 4 or 5 on 2 of those tests, AP tests. Then those are the only 2 that I would put in. I meet with college admissions folks a lot, and they have said they are very honest. If there are no AP test scores in there, they are not going to read negatively into that. And the reason that's true, and I believe them, is because there are so many things that can impact your ability. So if you remember back, and some of you I'm sure lived the nightmare of taking those AP tests online during COVID. So many of those, there were technical issues or glitches. Sometimes you could make it up, sometimes you couldn't. But I guess the bottom line is you decide what's best for you. But my recommendation is typically if you've taken the test, only report the test and the score if you got a 4 or 5. Activity section, I'll show you in a few minutes in more detail, but the Common App activity section essentially has 10 spaces, and you should include everything, right? So it's in-school activities, out-of-school activities, paid employment, volunteer work. It could be, if you had one of these self-driven projects where you've developed something, you can talk about that there. Often, you will have potentially given your, if you started a nonprofit, a name, something like that. The biggest restriction on that activity section that kills students is it's 150 characters to describe how you made an impact. So when you are writing those activity descriptions, I tell students, do it in Google Docs first if you want. It's easier to kind of assess where you are with your character count, but then you can cut and paste it into the Common App. The Common App offers a box, and it doesn't really say, you have 2 spaces left, you have 1 space left. It just says, it stops. It doesn't, it stops filling. So I encourage you to be thoughtful about how you describe your activities. I don't have time to get into it today, but as you're describing something, make sure you're using high, like action verbs, right? Led, managed, was responsible, mentored, guided. You're looking for words that are going to imply responsibility, action, accomplishment, right? So I don't just want to, let's say it's, you were in Habitat for Humanity. That's a common one. And I ask students, well, what did you do? And they can't really say, oh, I went to some meetings and we worked on fundraising. That doesn't really help anyone, believe that you're intimately involved in that was kind of an impact activity for you. So it's important to be truthful. I don't want you, I'm not encouraging students to embellish on what they did, but just understand that there are stronger ways to phrase things and make sure that your activity, that 150 characters, gives you maximum impact. The final element of the base Common Application is the writing section. So I mentioned earlier the personal statement, and that's a 650-word essay. There are 7 different prompts that you can choose from. Those prompts vary, obstacles, accomplishments, things like that. The last one is a catch-all. So if none of the prompts are speaking to you, and you are brainstorming and you are going back and forth with your parents or your friends or whoever you're brainstorming with, and you can't come up with an idea, use the 7th option and then just write about something that you're passionate about. So the 7th one is just meant to be a catch-all. 650 words is the max. The stronger personal statements are usually north of 600. So what I encourage students is when you're doing your first draft, do it as a complete free write, like I say a stream of consciousness write. And it might be 800 words, it might be 1,000 words, whatever it is. And then you can go back and kind of pick out the content. The first draft is really just about generating content so that you can get across kind of whatever the context or your topic is, what your core values are. Core values, the college essay guy is a guy that I follow some of his stuff. He has a core values exercise that you could Google. It's about a 5-minute exercise. I have most of my students do it because I want to understand what their 3 core values are. It has you do 10 and then pare down to 5 and 3. The core values are a way for us to understand what's most important to you. And then we want to incorporate that through examples in the context of your essay. Other writing elements of the Common App are going to be the additional information section. And that is kind of the ability for you to talk about anything that you would like to highlight. Typically, I have my students identify a couple activities that they had deep involvement with, leadership typically, and the Common App additional information section is more informational. It is not although it's in the writing section, like an essay, it's not meant to be a narrative. It is meant to be more informational and factual about what you accomplished, why you were involved, kind of how you impacted the community long-term, that type of thing. There's also an optional COVID essay that is 250 words in the writing section of the Common App. My philosophy is if the school gives you the opportunity to share something about yourself, don't leave the space blank. I'm not saying you have to say that you had a family member that was impacted by COVID or died. Sometimes it can be something that how the silver lining for COVID from you. Some students will use that section to talk about the impact on their grades during remote learning. But again, no whining, keep it short and succinct. Most of the country went through COVID. Most of the schools, the students were in remote learning. Some schools handle it better than others, but it's not a chance to kind of unload on all that. It's more an opportunity for you to highlight something that maybe I had a student that learned chess during COVID and became like a really competitive chess player after that. So things like that can be nice ways to highlight. All right. Last, I'm getting toward the end, and then I'm going to go to the actual ComNet for a few minutes. Susan, hopefully I'm okay. I know I'm getting close to time, like 5 more minutes.
It's fine, yeah.
Okay, all right. So these are just some tips that I wanted to share about writing a strong personal statement. So remember, this is that 650 word personal statement where you are replying to one of the prompts. The prompts, by the way, are all listed in the Common App. So you can either Google what they are. I didn't link them here because I don't have a way to get the link to you, but my key tip is read the prompt, understand what they're asking. Often students will write this really kind of beautiful essay. And then I say, is this going to be for the catch-all number 7 prompt? Oh, no. This is for prompt number 2. And it's like, okay, well, you didn't really answer that at all. So make sure you understand the prompt and how you're responding. Understand that the whole purpose of the essay is kind of to show self-reflection. So some students will just give me a laundry list of all their accomplishments. That's not really helpful because you're putting those accomplishments typically in your activity list as well as your additional information section. So they're looking for you to talk about something. Vulnerability sells well. Be honest with them. I mean, sometimes too much honesty. So don't, if you're struggling with some things, you don't want this to be, it's not a diary, right? So understand that the people that are reading this, some students are struggling with some really horrific things. The people that are reading this, if they hear anything that relates at all to family and abuse situations, are required to report that to the authorities. So some students, I think, are sharing in the context of really trying to kind of differentiate their application, but know that there's consequences to that. So be thoughtful about as you're selecting your topic, that you're not, I guess, doing something that's oversharing and belongs maybe more in a journal. But be reflective. I guess that's my point about saying being vulnerable and being reflective about what you learned, kind of how you changed your life as a result of what you're sharing. Avoiding taboo topics, the 2 I listed here, I get a lot, sort of the home run, the winning field goal, I got injured and couldn't, change my whole life. It could be an element of some part of your story, but those are sort of way too commonly used topics. And so grandparents is another one that I get a lot. And I, again, go back to what I told you in the beginning. Your goal in this process is to stand out and differentiate your application. So focus on sort of a theme, identify kind of like an anchor moment, right? So something that happened in your life that was a catalyst for change, or like something that happened to you, what happened and why did it matter, right? So I'm so into this. I'm constantly thinking about this. So when I see a story in the news, and if it's a high school student, I'm always in my mind like, wow, that's going to be an amazing personal statement. And my family thinks I'm funny, but I do think that it's kind of not just having it happen, what the moment is, but then figuring out how to show the reflection about what happened and kind of the depth that these schools are looking for. And then just most importantly, have it be in your voice, please. I had a family reach out to me the other day, and it was not someone I work with, and the dad had written the son's essay and wanted me to read it to make sure it sounded good. And, I'm not working with anyone there, but the universities can tell there's a big difference between the voice of a high school student and the voice of a 40 or 50-year-old parent. And so I do say, I know parents sometimes get heavy-handed and want to help with their feedback, and you want to go to someone for feedback. I think that just be cognizant, too many cooks in the kitchen is not a good thing. don't overshop for comments. Find someone that you trust. An English teacher is a good person. Some of the high school counselors might be able to help, but they're pretty overburdened. But find someone that you can use as a resource just to bounce ideas off of and give you feedback without rewriting it for you. All right, and then this is the actual Common App. So I'm going to escape out of this and go really quickly to the Common App. All right, so I have this set up as a practice account, and I really wanted, I'm not going to get into much depth, but I wanted to just at least show you the different components. So if you are in here or haven't been brave enough to set it up yet, you can see how it works. So the main platform that I mentioned, and I kind of went through the elements of that, is along the left, right? At profile, family, education, testing, activities, writing. One of the things I didn't touch on, so based on, I have some sample schools in here. Based on your schools that you are loading in, some of the universities don't want to wait for your official transcript to come. Your offer, if they make it to you, is contingent upon you giving an official transcript, but their evaluation, you are going to be putting in your own courses and grades. So that is listing all of the courses, freshman through junior year, as well as what you've registered for senior year. You'll put in, half credit for semester, 0.5 for semester classes, 1 credit for the others. So please know if you add, those schools, when you add the schools, the Common App will tell you who is requiring courses and grades. The other thing I wanted to show you is there's a My Colleges tab. So this is where you are going to add your colleges. As I mentioned, you can add up to 20 schools, but you should only be adding the schools that you are planning to apply to. Initially, when you're in this tab, you cannot add a college from this tab. So if you are just starting out, you have to go the very first school. You have to go to college search. So you just type in, let's say, New York University. Do I have a typo? I have an extra space. It's very sensitive for spaces and things like that. So you type in the name, the school comes up, you click the plus sign. And once you have one school, you can do everything from that point on the My Colleges tab. So you'll see it's alphabetical, New York University dropped in here. And then from this point forward, you can add colleges here. So when I was speaking earlier about the Common App being the 2 sections, understanding that when you're going in, let's pick, how about, let's just University of Michigan. When you go into the actual school side, they are going to, if you scroll down, they're going to have all the dates and deadlines and things like that. When your letters of recommendation come in, remember how I told you you could see that? When they get loaded, it'll be bright bold. I think it's like a blue and black. It'll say who's loaded. University of Michigan, one of the things I forgot to touch on. Gosh, I could talk way longer. But teacher evaluations, 1 required, 3 optional. So if you have additional teachers that are maybe not junior year teachers or they're not core teachers, University of Michigan and some of the more selective schools will take additional teacher recommendations. So I encourage you to load your schools, look at what the recommendation limits are, what they'll allow, and make sure you are A, fulfilling everything that is required, and B, is there a way you can enhance your application by getting some additional recommendations? Again, don't be, the admissions office only has 6 to 8 minutes for your entire application. So do not send content that is not going to add value. So they don't want to hear from your next door neighbor or people that aren't going to be sending letters of recommendation that are going to boost your application. But know if there are optional ones that you want to send. A coach might be good. Sometimes someone at your church, maybe someone you worked with in a club sponsor, something like that. Those can be differentiators on your application for the more selective schools. The other thing I wanted to show you is the dashboard. The dashboard has all of your schools listed. It'll say application in progress. And then once you submit, your application will show that it's submitted. And if it has been submitted, I don't have an example of a submitted one, but once it's submitted, you can click on it And then there's a PDF file of what you sent to that school. So sometimes students will say, oh my gosh, I can't remember if I included my test scores or I didn't. You can click on the name after it's been submitted in the dashboard and view it comes as a PDF, which is essentially what the school is offloading. The other, I'm going to show you 3 more things and then I'm going to wrap. So application requirements. Remember I said to you, there's a place you can go in here, and for all the schools that are on your list, if you click on the application requirements, it's going to self-populate this list. So it'll tell you what the options are. Do they have ED1, ED2, what the deadlines are they early action? Are they rolling, regular, what it is, and then what their fee is. They're also going to tell you if they expect the personal essay. C and G is courses and grades. So if you remember on this current list, University of Southern Cal and University of Wisconsin both wanted those. And then some schools will have portfolio requirements and things depending on your major. So that is a good way for you to kind of have everything, all your deadlines in one spot. The last thing I wanted to make sure I mentioned is when you were in the Common App, every time I work with students, we are trying to fill out all the information, but there's this preview button. Always view it in preview mode, and you can see, and I obviously have not filled out all the information, but you can see quickly sometimes if you have made a mistake by viewing it in preview mode. So encourage preview mode. Each section has it. The most important one is the writing section. Oh, I apologize. I meant to type something in here so I could show you. But so here's all the prompts I was talking about. I have the catch-all. But if you have an essay in here and you go into the preview mode, the Common App automatically inserts spaces between your paragraphs. So if you have pasted it into the Common App and it has a space between it, it's going to double the space. So it almost, when it's in your Common App, when you paste in, it looks like the paragraphs are on top of one another, but view it in preview mode and they are not. It is actually inserting a space for you. And it's not horrible if they're really widely spaced, but it can be problematic. So that was kind of and then the activity list, I'm not really gonna have a lot of time to get into, but if you go in here, the activity list has the 10 spaces. And as I mentioned, you're going to be restricted to the description, 150 characters, but there's a drop down, right? So you're, based on your activity, going to be able to say, was it a community service item? Was it something through athletics, career? Like if you've done some internships, job shadows, some of the things like that. You have the ability to use these arrows to move things up and down in the activity list and prioritize things. High impact things, right? Things you have depth of involvement, lots of hours are the things you want to be toward the top. They are going to ask you to check the years that you've been involved in that. And then was it during school, outside of school, year round? How many hours per week, weeks per year? And do I intend to participate in college in that activity? Yes is usually a good answer, right? They're looking for students to come and be engaged on campus. No one's going to be tracking you down from the synchronized dance team if you said yes. They're not sharing this information. It's more to give them an idea of the things you're interested in doing when you get to school. Sometimes it's difficult to find hours per week and the averages. If it's an activity that's sort of, sometimes it's really intense, and then other months it might only be 1 week. Just add it up for the year, pick the number of weeks and do an average. The colleges are not looking for this to be, they're not going to nail you that, no, you didn't have exactly that many hours. But when students are embellishing and they send me like their, I review as an administrator, my students, the activity list, if they physically weren't even awake that many hours, that's a problem, right? So don't embellish, be honest, but understand that it's not an exact science. And those are my tips. So I have some time for questions. Susan, I apologize. I think I went a few minutes over, so.
That's fine. We do have questions. So let me start at the beginning.
Okay.
Can you speak to what a student should look for if they are an undecided major?
Yes. So I think if you're applying undecided, many schools will still want you to write an essay about why this major. So I encourage you to identify at least 2 things that you're interested in and speak to what those are. So rather than saying, I don't know what I want to do, which is true for a lot of high school students, right? Just say I have diverse interests. Here's 2 areas that I'm thinking about. And this is how I've explored both of those areas. If you have not done anything to explore those areas and have time, I encourage you to do something, right? Whether it be a job shadow, an informational interview, a series of those. LinkedIn, you can, if your parents are on LinkedIn or something, you have a family friend that you can link with, that kind of exploration of careers is very valued, even if you don't know exactly what you want to major in.
Great, thank you. Then when you were talking about the slide with Notre Dame and what they are looking for in their students, how do you find out the goals of other schools that you talked about? The percent legacy, their athletics, is it on their website, or how would you find that out about other schools?
I was gonna say it's tricky, right? So this information, we actually have a relationship with the Notre Dame rep. So we got from the rep. Could be a good question. Remember when I talked about building connectivity to the regional admissions rep? That could be a question that you reach out and, obviously it wouldn't be your only question. Introducing yourself, what you're interested in studying or exploring. You were curious about some of the, is legacy valued, sort of those things. They're typically not as super transparent on their website about it. Sometimes just Googling can be actually helpful to you. There is something called the common data set that you can put in the university's name in the common data set, and that will give you some of the information, but not all of it. But if you put in, let's say in our example, Northwestern University common data set, it'll scroll down and give you the last 5 years of common data sets. And then you have the ability to kind of click on the most recent one. So sometimes perfect thing that'll sometimes it'll change year to year, demonstrated interest. So WashU in St. Louis is a school that just went need blind, meaning when they're evaluating applications, they don't consider a student's ability to pay at all. They accept everyone and then they figure it out. As a result of that, they stopped considering demonstrated interest in their process. I still feel like it's valuable for the student to demonstrate that interest to learn about the school, but that type of thing would be in that common data set report as well.
Great, thank you. And then in terms of applying to the University of Illinois, how does the Illinois app compare to the Common App?
So last year was Illinois' first year on the Common App, and to be quite honest, it was a little bumpy. The University of Illinois does not give preference either platform. The September 1st is when their school app opens, and it's also, you can load them in your Common App, but you can't put anything in until September 1st. So I think they're equal. It really is what's easier for you. I personally think doing it on the Common App that's what I encourage most of my students to do, just because then it's all in one place. And that Common App dashboard I showed you, you can kind of see when it's been sent in. You'll be able to see, it's actually kind of exciting. You can see when the university uploads your application, and then it's in review. Please know, and I meant to say this when we were looking, inevitably students are going to, they get excited and it's fun and they want to get something submitted. If you submit something and you fail to include something, you cannot add it later. So please be thoughtful. Do not rush to submit things until they're complete. You can reach out. University of Illinois basically says there's nothing we can do about it, right? So let's say you wanted to include your test scores and didn't, or something like that. Your only fallback would be when they're evaluating, because they're early action. If you applied early action, they're going to be looking at your application in late January, early February. Sometimes they will request mid-year grade reports, and then you can submit things that happened first semester. So that would be an opportunity if you took a new test to say, I took this test, but often in those cases, they will say, we don't want any old information, but the platforms for U of I, same.
Okay, great, thank you. And then could you remind us how to check what the middle 50% of ACT, SAT scores are for a school? And if you took an ACT, SAT and filled in the box to send the scores, but then got a higher score later, will they keep the highest score if you end up applying?
So I guess the first part of it is the mid 50%. You're confined from, typically the schools will have it on their website. If they don't, so we have a software platform, we get it all, that data kind of fed. But I think Niche, which is a free website, they might have you sign up, but I believe they have all that mid 50% data as well, if the university does not have it on their website. In terms of scores, so if you apply and submitted your application and then got a better score later, that would be something you could submit in the mid-year grade, like the mid-year report, but you can't get that information to them if you've already, to be evaluated. Let's say you're applying early decision and you got in October, you sent in your application early October, at the end of October, you got a higher score. There's no way to get that to them. So I encourage you to wait to submit your application until you have finished your testing, as long as you can get it, in time for the early action or early decision or whatever your deadline target is.
Thank you. Those are all the questions that I have submitted. If does anybody have any other questions?
Yeah, feel free to ask too. Everything good? Hopefully this was helpful.
Oh, I think it was wonderful. Thank you so much for your time today. I appreciate everybody coming and joining the meeting, and we'll hopefully you all get into the schools that you're interested in going to.
Yes.
Thanks.
Best of luck. And don't wait till the last minute. Get it done now. That's my parting words of advice.
Thank
all right,
you.
Good luck to you all. Enjoy your senior year as well.
Absolutely.